So I've had my hands on the OM1 Mark II for 4 days now, testing it out for macro photography and trying to answer the question whether you should purchase this camera for macro photography. Now, this isn't a full review of the OM1 Mark II. I've only had it for 4 days, so this is only my initial thoughts of using it in an indoor studio environment. Now, I wanted to keep myself in the studio because I wanted to eliminate all other factors. I want to eliminate weather conditions, uncooperative subjects, lighting conditions, so I kept it indoors. I used the same flash, which is the Godox V350O. I used the same diffuser on it, which is the Cygnus Tech, and I used the same lens, which is the 60mm macro lens. These results may differ if you use a different flash from the one that I am using. So the only difference in testing was the camera body itself. But not only that, I also had my hands on an OM1 as well for testing. So I have tested the EM1 Mark II against the OM1 and the OM1 Mark II. And this is my honest opinion about them cameras. Now, before we get started, I am not an OM ambassador. OM Systems have nothing to do with this video. In fact, they don't even know I'm doing this video, and they haven't sent me any cameras for testing. I'm able to make this video thanks to friends within the photographic community that have loaned me their cameras for me to play with and to test out. Almost everything I talk about in this video is to do with macro photography only. But stick to the end of the video to find out my thoughts on whether you should upgrade to this new OM1 Mark II. I want to talk about price before we get into the major differences, because it is a major factor in whether you want to upgrade from an EM1 Mark II to an OM1 or from the OM1 to the Mark II. The EM1 Mark II we can only get second hand, and these prices are from MPB. They're not a sponsor, but there is a link in the description if you want to check out MPB. But you can get the EM1 Mark II second hand from £389 for this camera. You can get the OM1 direct from OM Systems for £1,399. But you can get it grey market at £1,120. Now, I'm not going to get into the debate of grey market, but essentially, if you're a working professional, don't buy grey market. If you're a hobbyist, you can get away with grey market. Essentially, the only difference is the warranty and how the particular shop or manufacturer handles that warranty. Now, second hand from MPB, you can pick up an OM1 from £939, and that is current price at the time of recording this video. Now, when it comes to the OM1 Mark II, brand new from the UK, we are talking £2,199 for the body only. Grey market, it's £1,545, and from MPB, it's £1,619. So there is a significant difference in price, and that is roughly around £600 for each model. So as you upgrade, you need to add about £600 to your budget. And what I want to find out is to upgrade from my EM1 Mark II to the OM1 Mark II. If I trade in my EM1 Mark II, we're looking at around £1,800 UK market value to upgrade from that camera to this camera, and that is very important, and it's one of the crucial factors of why I make my decisions here on the channel is price. First of all, let's talk about my trusty EM1 Mark II. I've had this camera for over a year now. It's been my bread and butter when it comes to macro photography. If I do any type of portfolio work, this is the camera I'll be using for that work. So I'm going to talk about the OM1 first, the first version of the OM1. When it comes from the EM1 Mark II to the OM1 beats it in every single area. Better processor, better stabilization, better focus bracketing. Across the board, it's just better overall. So in the EM1 Mark II, we have a 20.4 megapixel sensor with a TruePic 8 image processor. The OM1, the same size sensor, which is the 20.4 megapixels. However, it's a stacked BSI live MOS sensor with TruePic X processor. A higher quality image sensor and a better processor. So overall, it's just generally faster than the EM1 Mark II. The EM1 Mark II has 5.5 stops of stabilization, and the OM1 has up to 8 stops of image stabilization, and that's a 5-axis stabilization. Internal focus stacking, they both do 15 images. However, if you switch to focus bracketing, the EM1 Mark II is limited to 1/50th of a second, whereas the OM1 is 1/100th of a second. When you're out in the middle of the day, that can be a big difference. The weight of the EM1 is 574 grams. The OM1 is 599 grams, so it's slightly heavier. When it comes to the actual bodies, they're roughly the same. In real world difference, I don't think you're really going to notice much difference with the weight and the size of the body. Video specs, if you want to quickly take some video of insects, the EM1 Mark II will do 4K 30 frames a second. The OM1 will do 4K 60. So across the board, the OM1 is much better than the EM1 Mark II on paper. Okay, but what about from the OM1 to the OM1 Mark II? Essentially, it's the same camera. You're getting an updated version of the OM1. It has added rubberized dials. It's got more RAM for faster processing, a larger buffer, and it also has a live ND, which generally we don't use for macro photography. Got the same sensor as the OM1 with the same processor. It does have 8.5 stops of image stabilization, which I'll be honest with you, in the real world, I never really noticed any difference from the OM1 to the OM1 Mark II. It's got the same 15 images for focus stacking. It's got the same 1/100th shutter speed limit on the focus bracketing. It's the same weight. It does 4K 60, 14-bit recording, shoots 120 frames a second with the electronic shutter. It's essentially the same camera, but there are some very subtle differences when it comes to macro photography. However, let's talk about now the image quality from these three cameras. All three cameras produce superb image quality for macro shots. However, when it comes to difficult situations, that's where the different cameras stand out. The ISO ranges for my EM1 Mark II, I won't push it any higher than an ISO of 2000. If I'm really pushing it and I need to use an AI noise reduction, I can push it as far as 6400 before I have to really worry about image degradation due to reducing the noise. On the OM1, I can easily be satisfied with using an ISO of 3200 and not worry about noise, and I can push that camera up to an 8000 ISO without needing to worry too much about not being able to reduce the noise using AI noise reduction. And similarly with the OM1 Mark II, it's exactly the same. I'm happy up to 3200 ISO, and I can easily and happily go up to 8000 ISO and still reduce the noise and get a clean image. Diffraction on all three cameras with the 60mm macro kicks in at around f14. So on all three cameras, I'd highly recommend that you don't go above f14 unless you're prepared to sharpen and fix the diffraction issues in your image. You can go above f14. Don't let me or anyone else stop you from doing that. Just bear in mind that the image will get softer the higher you go. Focus stacking. Now, I don't do focus stacking in camera, but all three cameras are essentially the same. It's a 15 image limit. But when it comes to focus bracketing, I do a lot of focus bracketing. And that's where there was a big difference between these three cameras. So I set up a test scene here in my office of 100 focus bracketed images at different various power levels on my flash. Let's talk about the standard setting. That's 1/16th power. To get 100 shots out of my EM1 Mark II, it took 20.2 seconds. The OM1 took 19 seconds, and the OM1 Mark II took 19 seconds as well. That might not seem much, but in the macro world, it can make a big difference. At 132 power, the EM1 Mark II took 16.13 seconds. The OM1 took 13.95 seconds, and the OM1 Mark II took 12.5 seconds. At 1/64th power, the EM1 took 15.5 seconds for 100 images. The OM1 was 13 seconds, and the OM1 Mark II was 11.3 seconds. And there was no point going any further because the limitation then was with the flash. So at 128 power, the results were exactly the same. So if you're trying to get the quickest focus stacking possible out of your camera, from these test results, 1/64 power is probably the best. And here's the big difference. I would not use 1/64 power on my EM1 Mark II because I'd have to bump up the ISO to a point where I'm doing a lot of processing to get clean images. But with the OM1 Mark II, I wouldn't have to. I'd be able to put up the ISO, put my power to 1/64 power, and crank out as many shots as possible. And in that situation, this camera would do it a lot faster than the EM1 Mark II. And the difference would be between getting a stack and not getting a stack. We're grasping at straws here, but here's a perfect example for you, okay? At 1/64th power, it takes 15.5 seconds on my EM1 Mark II. And let's say there's an insect that will keep still for 14 seconds. I wouldn't get the shot with the EM1 Mark II. I'd have to cut out the frames where it moved. But with the OM1 Mark II, I would get all the shots in stack. So again, it all comes down to the subject and whether you've got a cooperative subject or not. But it is quicker on the OM1 Mark II to get a stack than it is the EM1 Mark II. So those are the most of the tests that I've done. So I did manage to get some comparison shots for you so you can see edited images. Now again, the images out of the OM1 are far cleaner and far better than the EM1 Mark II, but you can process it to get the same type of image. The first image I want to show you here is of Missy, my jumpy spider. This one is from the OM1 at f14. Perfectly usable image, and I'll be honest with you, the image was gorgeous out of the camera. I added, I believe this was my boom preset from my V3 actions for Lightroom. Link in the description if you want to take a look at my actions. I then took Missy out again for another shot, and this shot is done with the EM1 Mark II. Obviously the images are different when it comes to the pose and the angles and all that type of stuff. It's different and the scene is different, but what we're talking about is the quality of the image. The quality of the image between these two shots is minimum. There's not much difference in quality. The difference is with the EM1 Mark II, I had to do a lot more processing to get the image where I wanted it compared to the OM1. When I got the OM1 Mark II in my hands, I took Bungie out for a little bit of a photo shoot. Now here's an image taken on the EM1 Mark II. I love this image. I think it's gorgeous. Now, as for the OM1, Bungie doesn't like the OM1 at all. So when I tried to get the same picture with the OM1, he just wouldn't let me take it. So if you want to listen to a non-expert macro photographer when it comes to which camera you should buy, Bungie says don't buy the OM1. Now he did, however, like the OM1 Mark II, and it's exactly the same process. I've used the same preset, which is boom, from my V3 actions. The only difference is, again, there's less processing on the OM1 Mark II file compared to the EM1 Mark II. This file has no noise reduction. At the native ISO, it is very clean, and I haven't had to do any type of noise reduction. So I'm going to go through some scenarios now as to whether or not you should upgrade or buy the OM1 Mark II. Now, as I state, whether or not, in my opinion, you should upgrade, it all comes down to budget. So if you're a working professional and you're earning money through macro photography and you have an EM1 Mark II, it's a no-brainer. Absolutely upgrade. And I would highly recommend, if your budget suits, to upgrade to the OM1 Mark II. It's an absolutely fabulous camera. You can tell the difference when you hold both cameras and use them. The quality of the files, the image stabilization, how fast it stacks, it's just better overall. If you have an OM1 Mark I, it's a hard call to upgrade it to the Mark II. The Mark II is better, don't get me wrong, and if you're doing any type of autofocusing, the Mark II is better than the Mark I. However, I have it on good authority that there is a firmware upgrade coming to the OM1 that does improve the autofocus, closing the gap again from the OM1 to the OM1 Mark II. But if we're talking just macro, if you can afford it and you have money to burn, I would say yes, upgrade to the Mark II. If you don't, then honestly, in the field, you're not really going to notice any difference from the OM1 to the OM1 Mark II, unless you're doing autofocus or you're doing large burst modes on birds or anything like that, because the buffer is larger in the OM1 Mark II. But if you're doing the type of work I do, which is focus bracketing, macro, single shots, you're really not going to tell no difference. If you're going from one system to another, like if you're Canon user, Sony or Nikon, you're switching to OM, then I'd highly recommend you go straight for the OM1 Mark II. For the extra money difference of buying new from the OM1 and the Mark II, you're better off with the Mark II. If you're one of those photographers that just likes to show off and have the best, obviously it's the OM1 Mark II. Now the question that I know I'm going to get is, am I going to upgrade from my EM1 Mark II to the OM1 Mark II? No. And the reason why is this: the OM1 Mark II is better across the board than my EM1 Mark II. But in my opinion, when I'm looking at the files and I'm editing those files, it's not £1,800 better. If it was, it'd be a no-brainer. I would buy it. As it stands at the moment, I'm getting everything I need to from my EM1 Mark II. So I will most likely leave upgrading that camera until there's something it can't do, or I've got money to burn and I can just upgrade without breaking the bank. But for now, my plans would be to upgrade it sometime next year. For now, I will stick to my EM1 Mark II. And anyone out there who's got an EM1 Mark II, if you're happy with it, stick with it. If you've got money to burn, upgrade it. That's the way I would look at it. If you're not happy with the files coming out of the EM1 Mark II, upgrade it. I do absolutely love the build quality on here. We have some extra custom features that you can have on it. everything's better. Everything is better on this camera. And I really want to love it. And I really want to say to you, buy this camera, upgrade to it. But the cost of upgrading from the EM1 Mark II is just too high for me to justify upgrading it at this time. Now, obviously, the prices of the OM1 Mark II will come down. I also have the option of upgrading to just the first version, which is the OM1. That will only cost me £600. But like I said, when I'm editing the images, I'm not seeing £1,800 difference between these two cameras. The best way I can describe what this camera will do for you is this. The OM1 Mark II makes it easier to get the shot. Now again, if you're doing things other than macro, if you're doing wildlife and nature, this is an absolute must because the autofocus in this blows that out the water. Okay, the autofocus, the subject recognition, everything is brilliant on it. So if you need any type of autofocusing or anything like that, it's an absolute must, upgrade it. But for me, for now, I'm going to stick with my EM1 Mark II. As usual, if you have any questions, again, I've used all three cameras. Let me know in the comments below and I will try my best to answer them truthfully for you. Alternatively, you can also contact me on Instagram if you wish to for a direct message and I will give you my complete honest feedback on these three cameras. Again, I'm not associated with OM Systems. They haven't sent me these cameras. Photography friends have loaned them me for me to have a go at and to get this video out to you. But that's where I'm going to leave this video. My name's Stewart Wood. Thank you for watching this video and I'll see you in the next one. Saying that, I really don't want to send it back to the owner. OM Systems do such a good job, it's hard to know whether you want to upgrade or not. But when I'm out in the wild and you got that little 2 that just says, you've got the best gear. It's, yeah. Anyway, get out of here. I'll see you later. Thank you for sticking to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, then please subscribe and click the like button. It really does help out the channel. I want to thank my Patreon supporters for their continued support in supporting me and this channel. If you're interested in joining Patreon, then check in the description below this video for a link to Patreon. If you want to continue watching my macro journey, then click one of the videos in front of you now.